Hey everybody, welcome back. I feel like a little deja vu here because I'm doing yet another Klipsch upgrade video. As you can see, the big boy here behind me, this is the RF7 III, a little bit older model, but it had the same issues that we see in a lot of other Klipsch models, like the original RP600M, the 8000 model. We're seeing a situation where the drivers are not in phase, which means the time arrival from the tweeter to the woofers are out of time, and it's creating a big hole in the response. So you guys keep sending them to me for upgrades. I got another one behind this one in the shop. I got a big center channel to do, so I just keep going at these things and trying to correct the stuff and making it better for you guys. And I know the Klipsch guys are watching. They've started coming out with newer versions. They've got a new version of the RP600M that has a redesigned crossover, and it doesn't have that huge hole in the response. They've changed the order of the filters so that the drivers are more in phase, and maybe they'll be doing that with some of the newer models. Maybe they'll go through some of these other versions, these other models, and do some corrections on those too. But for now, we're going to offer some upgrade kits to fix these things, and let's dig right into this thing. First of all, let's look at the original crossover. Yeah, there's some cheesy parts in there, and they just put enough parts on there to make it work. They didn't really address some of the peaks in the tweeter's response or the way the top end of the tweeter is really rolled off. So we went in and addressed that stuff, and let's look at the measurements on this thing. This is the on-axis frequency response showing the tweeter and the woofers independently of one another. And the reason I'm showing this to you is so you can see they are not in phase. In other words, the tweeter rolls off from one end, the woofers roll off from the other end, and they don't sum. You see a little summation there, which indicates maybe within about 20 degrees rotation. So I'd say they're 70 degrees out of phase. So they need to be at a zero sum for it to sum flat, and they are not. If you move up, meaning that the measuring distance, this is taken at tweeter axis, and also moved out to 50-something inches out to take the same measurement. Very little change at 50-something inches. Very little change whether or not you're in the room. If you're on this axis, the tweeter is just delayed in time versus the woofers. So on tweeter axis, this is what you're getting. Now, as you move up, that means you're moving the woofers further away in time, and the tweeter's getting closer to you in time. It gets worse. The hole gets deeper. They become, at one point, 180 degrees out of phase. So if you're listening to these in a store and you're standing right in front of the speaker, from 8 feet away, and your head is this much above the tweeter level, that's what you're going to hear. You're going to hear the huge, deep hole. In fact, let's throw the vertical off-axis response up and take a look at it. And you can just see how bad that is. Now, what that does mean, though, is if you move down with the microphone or with your ear, like if you're sitting at the level of this first woofer or lower, they start to become more in phase. In other words, the time arrival of the woofers are starting getting closer versus the tweeter. So let's look at what we got there. And as you can see, it's a lot better. It's still rough. That response is choppy and it's all over the place. The yellow line is the line where it has moved down 8 inches from the tweeter axis, and that's where it's the smoothest. So it's about right here on that axis, somewhere in here. If you're in that plane, they're not quite as out of phase. So yeah, you have to sit down in a beanbag chair to listen to these things or something for it to not have that problem. Let's look at the horizontal off-axis. The horizontal off-axis drops off rather smoothly and evenly, but still there's that huge hole in the response. So that's a mess. Spectral decay tells you a lot about a speaker. It tells you how it dissipates stored energy and how clean it's going to sound. And as you can see, there's a few little ripples there down in the lower range of the woofer's range. Not bad. There's a little ring in there at the tweeter, but not bad. So it's not bad at all in that regard, but it's still a choppy response. And the spectral decay allows you to see the frequency response without smoothing. So you actually see every little peak and what it would be without a third octave smoothing, which is industry standard. You see exactly what it looks like in the spectral decay. So that information is there, unsmoothed, and it's rough. Also, let's look at the impedance curve. Ooh, the impedance is rough. The crossover that they're using is causing a huge peak, but where the tweeter is crossing over to the woofer, they've got really small cap on the tweeter, which is necessary to pull the lower frequency range of the tweeter down, because the waveguide, or the horn that it's loaded in, increases output as frequency decreases. So you have to start way back at the curve and put a small cap on it to try and pull that down, which is what they've done. But they didn't correct for that, and the impedance has got a huge spike in the middle. So an amplifier is going to see that as a very uneven load, versus down at the woofer end where it drops below 4 ohms. And then we've got spikes coming up in the middle there, which is off the chart above 90 ohms. So it's probably 100, 110 ohms right there at that point, and it's about 11 ohms at the tweeter end. And looking at it now with my glasses, I can see it's right at 4 ohms at the woofer end. Also, if you look at the impedance curve, you see, you're supposed to see on a ported speaker, you're supposed to see at the very bottom a nice rise and a dip, and another rise and another dip. And that dip in the middle is where the tuning frequency is of the port. What we're seeing here is we're seeing little peaks, one right in the port tuning, one after. Those are resonances. Those can be either resonances within the port, it can be cabinet wall resonances. If it's cabinet wall resonances, usually lining it with no res will knock all of that out of it. But in this case, yeah, there's no telling. It's a bit of a mess. So let's look at what do we do with this thing. And I want to look at it this time in a comparative way so that we can see apples to apples. What are we looking at here? And again, I moved out to like 50 inches to do the design work on it, and then I moved back in to do a 1 watt 1 meter to do an industry standard measurement on this thing. So let's look at a 1 watt 1 meter on axis frequency response, and you can see it's nice and smooth now. In fact, it's probably within plus or minus a dB and a quarter all the way across. Much smoother. And let's look at the response with the new crossover on it compared to the old. And what I did on the new is I crossed these woofers over differently. In other words, this woofer is crossed into the tweeter, and then this lower woofer is just playing the lower ranges only. So we're not trying to cross both of them to the tweeter. So it makes the integration much smoother. When both of these were playing at the same time, like it was originally, the acoustic center is here versus the acoustic center here, and those distances are so far away that it causes more time delay issues. So we're getting, as you move up vertically, you're getting a bigger cancellation because the acoustic centers are so far apart. The closer you get the acoustic centers to each other, and the lower the crossover point is, which means longer wavelengths, the more variance you have moving up and down without any change in the response. So this woofer is crossed over much lower. So if we look at the crossover response, you'll see 3 curves and then the average. And we let the tweeter play on down a little bit lower. We used a few more parts in the tweeter circuit to try and control some of those peaks and bypass some of that stuff in the top end to try and bring some of that top end back. So we brought the rolled off top end back. We balanced the response all the way across. It is a lot smoother. It's going to be a lot more balanced. And let's look at the vertical off axis. In fact, let's look at the vertical off axis now versus the vertical off axis original. Let's get both of these graphs up here and do a comparison. As you can see with the crossover we just designed for it, you can move vertically up and down, and the speaker is going to maintain the same sound signature. So no big holes in the response at all. What that means is the room response is going to be a lot more even. The ceiling reflection, the floor reflection, they're all going to be more indicative of the on-axis response. So it should be much smoother completely in the room. You know, you have to look at vertical and horizontal off axis to get an idea. What is it going to do in my room? The way it looked originally, what it would be like in your room could probably a disaster. It's going to look more like the off-axis response when you look at a room response than the on-axis response, because it's going to take into account all those reflections. Let's look at the horizontal off-axis. Now that it has a accurate and smooth frequency response, the horizontal off-axis looks great on this speaker. Spectral decay, much cleaner spectral decay. And if we look at the impedance response, we see it is much smoother, much more balanced from end to end. Your amplifier is going to see the load the same on both ends. Now there is still a few little ripples down low. It's because we didn't go in and change a lot of the insulation on the inside of the speaker. We didn't add no res to this version that we were working on. If you go in and add the no res, it will control some of these resonances. And this box, oh man, it's a buzz box. There's a brace between the two drivers here and one brace down at the bottom. But it is a lot of cabinet area with no bracing, and it resonates. And so the no res will fix that. So that was the stuff that we fixed to correct all the problems. Now the other thing, which is even bigger, is the quality of the parts that were used. As we noted in the earlier, looking at the picture of the crossover parts, that was the cheapest stuff they can get their hands on to put in this speaker. We've gone a completely different direction here. We've got a large air core inductor on the lower woofer, a pretty good size air core inductor on the upper woofer. On the tweeter, there's a couple of them in the circuit and a couple of them in notch filters that are controlling the peaks. So all good quality air core inductors. We've got sonic caps in the tweeter circuit. We've got some good quality poly caps going in the woofer circuit that are big values. So we felt like it was a better value there just to use some good poly caps there. And some good quality resistors that are not sandcast resistors. It comes with, of course, tube connectors, which are much higher quality than those cheesy bonding posts that have steel nuts on the end of them. And new wiring. 4 sheets of no-res, which is just going to cover these things. You can't get too happy with it. If you start trying to fill it from edge to edge in there, you're going to wind up needing one more sheet. But you can do it with 4 sheets, and we're trying to keep the cost down. These are the parts for one speaker. So it's quite a few parts involved, and when you have to go in and correct a response on a tweeter that's doing all this, it requires more parts, and it costs a little bit more money, especially when you're using good quality parts. So in the end, the total for all of this is $950. So for $950, if you own one of these things, own a pair of these, and you want to convert them into something that actually sounds good, we got it all done for you. It's going to be easy to install, and it'll be a nice introduction into DIY if you've never done something like this before. We can help you along the way if you're worried about putting it together. It is going to be point-to-point wired. It's not going on a circuit board. You can mount it on multiple boards. You can mount just the lower woofer crossover in the area behind the lower woofer. You could mount the crossover for the next woofer right behind it, and you can do the tweeter one up in that same cavity area or something like that. There's ways you can split it up. You can make it easy. It's not as bad as it seems, but it does involve some parts. It will take some time, but it's not difficult. So if this speaker is something you got in your arsenal over there and you want to turn it into something, we got you covered. And more to come. We got that other Klipsch one to do, and I got a lot more cool videos coming your way. We're just trying to knock them out as I make time for it, and I've been really busy. I'm sorry I hadn't cranked them out as often as I'd like, and I'll try to get back on schedule as soon as I can. That's it for this one. I appreciate you guys watching, and if you would, hit the subscribe button so you'll get notification of when our next videos drop. Thanks.